Okay, great. Well, good evening, Penticton, and welcome to our online information session to discuss the North Wiltse Block OCP amendment application, zoning amendment bylaw application. Tonight's session will be recorded, so please just know that we'll be sharing the recorded session on Shape Your City when it's finished. And just before we get started, I just want to let you know that, or take a moment to acknowledge that tonight's meeting is taking place on the traditional and unceded territories of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. And we extend our appreciation to the Syilx Okanagan people for the opportunity to hold this meeting here today. And I would just like to start by introducing who's here today on our panel. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joanne Kleb, and I'm the Manager of Communications and Engagement for the City of Penticton, and I'll be facilitating tonight's session. And with me are Stephen Collier. He's a member of our planning team, and he is our primary presenter tonight. And also with us is Michael Hodges, our Development Infrastructure Manager, who's going to be available to answer all your tough questions about traffic and infrastructure. And before we get started, I just want to take a moment to explain what the city's role is in this proposal and application. It's important that you realize that our job is really just to facilitate the process for the community to consider applications. We make sure that applications, or we review the applications to see if they align with regulations and city policies and plans. And we make sure to involve residents in accordance with our engagement policy, because these decisions will affect you. And so with that in mind, our goal today is to first and foremost make sure you're aware of the proposal and what it entails, provide you with opportunities to learn more and ask questions, and also gather your feedback that will be shared with the applicant and staff and council before it is taken to council for first reading. So how does the session work today? As I mentioned, it is recorded so that we can post it on the website after. When it comes to questions and answers, we ask that you submit your Q&A into the Q&A function of Zoom. This ensures that we have a nice orderly queue to follow and that your question doesn't get lost in the chat function. We also will have some interactive polls to make sure that you're following along and to gather your feedback as we go. And it's important also to remind you that the intent of the engagement session is to really surface the issues and opportunities that the community sees with this proposal, and that information will be shared to inform council's decision. Ultimately, council is elected to make these decisions on behalf of the city, and they have to balance many factors when making these decisions, including the feedback of the community. And with that in mind, I'm going to test our polling tools and just see who's in the room and find out what brings you out tonight. So please just watch for the poll to pop up on the screen. So you should be seeing our first poll asking where you live. Do you live near the Wiltse Block? Do you live in Penticton? Do you live outside of Penticton? Let's see where everyone is located, because that gives us a bit of insight as to what your interests are. Great, so I think we've heard from everyone, so I'm just going to go ahead and share the results. And so, not surprisingly, the majority of people live in or near the North Wiltse Block. We also have citizens from across Penticton and a few outside of Penticton. And with that, we're going to get the show on the road, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Stephen.
All right, thanks, Joanne. So today there's three parts of the presentation. First, we'll provide an overview of the planning process and how decisions on land use are made. Then we'll go through some key information about the North Wiltse Block proposal. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. Please note the session is recorded in order to capture the discussion and the questions that come forward. We'll start off with a little planning 101. This section of the presentation gives an overview of land use planning and some background about the city's official community plan. The purpose of the official community plan is to provide a framework of goals and policies to guide decisions on planning and land use within Penticton. The OCP was created with substantial public involvement and is meant to guide the evolution of this city up until 2045, by which time it's expected the city will grow to about 42,000 people. The official community plan establishes goals and policies to enable sustainable growth in our community. While housing in Penticton is predominantly single detached houses, currently 43% of the total, this proportion has been decreasing. This trend is going to continue into the future due to the limited options for new single detached neighborhoods and the increased preference for more urban living closer to the core. The next largest segment of housing, shown on the next slide here, is low-rise apartments up to 6 stories, followed by other multi-housing types such as townhouses, high-rise apartments, and duplexes. The city is expected to see an average annual population growth rate of 0.65% per year up until 2046. Variation in this growth rate could result in periods of higher growth or lower growth. Penticton is expected to experience net growth, mostly due to migration into the community. The 2021 census shows that Penticton has been growing quickly in the last 5 years, with an average population growth rate of 1.86% per year between 2016 and 2021. The OCP anticipates an increase of about 250 people per year to have a population of around 42,000 by 2046. That represents an increase of about 7,500 people and almost 4,500 households over 2016 levels. Penticton had a population of about 37,000 people in 2021, according to the census. The city has seen slow but steady growth of about 0.5% a year since 1986. We're seeing household sizes decrease, which is typical of an older and aging population. The proportion of 1 and 2 person households in Penticton is over 75%. In terms of needs by housing type, the greatest future demand will be for duplexes and infill type housing, with over 1,500 new units by 2046. There will be a need for all types of housing across the housing spectrum, from single detached houses to apartments. The official community plan outlines areas of the city where we expect growth to occur. In the 2002 official community plan, many areas up in the hillsides were expected to be developed, as you see on the map to the left. In the 2019 official community plan, most of these growth areas have been scaled back to the built-up area of town and a few hillside areas, including the Upper Wiltse lands, one of the 4 yellow areas shown on the map on the right. The official community plan outlines a plan to manage the population growth expected in the city over the next 25 years. Much of Penticton's development will be accommodated through intensification in the existing urban areas, maximizing the use of existing assets and infrastructure, creating complete and accessible communities, and intensifying underused and vacant land. There is an emphasis on low-rise and mid-rise developments rather than high-rise developments. A few key areas are identified for new hillside development to meet the demand for single detached homes. This next section of the presentation will focus on the development proposal received for the North Wiltse block. The subject lands are a total 128 hectares or 317 acres in size. The development site is located almost entirely on the west side of the high voltage Fortis transmission line right-of-way, with a total development site area of about 44 hectares or 109 acres. The development site is located upslope of the Wiltse residential subdivision. Currently, the development site is vacant of any structures. Although it's privately owned land, the development site is a popular hiking and mountain biking destination. The North Wiltse block has been designated for residential development since the first official community plan was adopted by council in 1982. Over time, development in the lower Wiltse area has occurred, and that in the 2005 comprehensive development plan, it was identified that the upper Wiltse area was a major growth area with a potential build out of 800 units. In 2008, a terms of reference was endorsed by council to prepare an area plan for the upper Wiltse lands. That terms of reference originally proposed a golf course on the lands, but that idea was later removed. In 2014, the Wiltse Area Structure Plan was approved by City Council to determine more specific land use needs and appropriate development layouts on the North Wiltse block and the South Wiltse block, which is currently the location of the Bluffs at Skaha development at the end of Evergreen Drive. The Wiltse area structure plan was a more specific land use plan, which introduced many multifamily areas within the future development. This plan envisioned approximately 670 homes on the North Wiltse block, with a commercial node as well. The basic layout of the Wiltse area structure plan, with some minor changes, was incorporated into the 2019 official community plan and influenced the land use designations that exist on the subject property today. So this proposal is to facilitate residential development on the North Wiltse block. A variety of different zones are proposed to allow various residential densities. The plans show approximate unit counts, which could change slightly as the development is built out. It's expected there will be 183 single detached homes, 28 duplex units, and 475 multifamily townhouse units. Several parkland areas are proposed as well. 11.7 hectares of land is proposed for active parkland, of which 3.75 hectares is considered flat and usable for playgrounds, sports courts, and recreation areas. A total of 28.1 hectares of land is proposed to remain in its natural state and dedicated to the city. This slide shows the proposed zoning on the North Wiltse block. On this map, north is oriented to the left and the existing neighborhoods are at the bottom. The dark green line running through the middle of the site is along the Fortis right-of-way, which would be dedicated to the city as a linear trail. Much of the development area is on the west side of the Fortis line. 3 active parks are proposed, one at the south end of the development near Partridge Drive, one at the north end of the development near Wiltse Boulevard, and one near the middle of the development next to the Fortis right-of-way. Conceptual landscape drawings were one of the many plans submitted with this development application package. The proposed zoning has to align with the OCP future land use designations. This map shows the specific areas on the site where the OCP designations are proposed to change. Those are highlighted in red. There's a few examples here. The land to the southeast corner will be redesignated from residential to parks, and the section around the middle of the development will be redesignated from residential to multifamily. And the section near the north entrance, close to Wiltse Boulevard, will be redesignated from multifamily to parks.
Okay, thanks for that quick overview of some of the main features of the proposal. And before we carry on, we're just going to do our next poll. And just based on what you've heard so far and what you might have read about, we just want to find out what is it that you like about this proposal and what you don't like. You can share in the chat and also let us know why or why not, why you like something or why you don't like something. I'll just go to the poll and launch it. So just watch for it to come on your screen momentarily, and you can choose multiple options. So you should be looking at the poll. So tell us, do you like that it's going to add some single family homes? Do you like that it's got duplex units included? Do you like that there's more multifamily? Do you like the parks? Do you like the conservation lands? Do you like the trails and pedestrian walkways? How about the bike lanes? Or do you just not like the proposal at all? Definitely an option, but you got to give us an answer in the chat as to why you feel that way. You can also let us know if we've missed something on our list, or is there a feature of the proposal that you like or don't like that we haven't mentioned. So I'll just give you a few more seconds to answer. We've heard from 20 of you out of, we're down to 35 participants now. And we're still seeing some more responses come in. And so we'll just give you another few seconds here, and then we'll share with the others what it is that people like about it. Okay, I think that's probably just about most people have finish their participation. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results so you can see what your other fellow participants have had to say. Okay, so you should be looking at the results now. It's a long list. So if you're seeing it the same way I am, first and foremost, people do really like the parks. not surprising. It's really great to see that type of park development up in the more remote parts of the city. We also have a lot of support for the trails and pedestrian walkways. Definitely something we've heard all along, that people want to see that continue. Again, a lot of support for having a large portion of the area dedicated for conservation lands. And then following that, single family homes. I guess there's some people that like that there are still some single family homes being considered for development in Penticton. And then as we start to see less support, still support though, some for bike lanes and for multifamily units. And then also about a quarter of you have said that you don't like the proposal. And I hope that you gave us a little more context to your results and your choices in the chat. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll get back to our presentation.
All right, thanks, Joanne. I'll continue the presentation here with the overview and comment on a couple of the park designs that were submitted with this proposal. So 3 new active parks are proposed in the new neighborhood. The applicant has submitted some preliminary park design concepts to help people visualize what the parks could look like. I'll remind people that the concepts are not final and the city is interested in feedback on what residents would like to see in these future park areas. This example on the screen is the North Entrance Park located near Wiltse Boulevard. The concept shows a playground, turf area, picnic tables, and benches, as well as trail connections to other parts of the neighborhood. This park concept on the slide is for a park located near the middle of the neighborhood next to the Fortis right-of-way. It shows space for a potential dog park, another playground, or perhaps a community garden. Again, trail connections lead from this park to the other 2 parks being proposed. And the final park concept that we'll show today is for the large 4-acre citywide park just to the east of the Fortis line at the south end of the development. It shows a parking lot, room for a small soccer field, a multi-purpose lawn area, and picnic shelter. Near the center is an amphitheater area and washroom building. Again, this is conceptual only and demonstrates the options available for this larger park, which is proposed to be included in phase 1 of the development.
Great. And so can you just clarify for me, Stephen, those parks will become the responsibility of the city, is that correct?
That's right. So all the park spaces would be zoned and dedicated to the city should the development proceed.
Great. Well, that brings us to our next Zoom poll, which is when do you get to design a park? Not too often. So we want to know what are the types of amenities you would like to see in these new parks? And this is a question that we have on our feedback form, but also something we're going to ask as part of our polls. So please watch for your next poll to come up on the screen. We've given you a number of options that you can choose from. You can choose as many as you like, and you can also offer your own options in the chat. So in terms of what kinds of things would you like to see in these new parks? Is it more playgrounds for the little guys? Is it dog parks? I hear that often in most of my engagement sessions that people want some decent dog parks in town. What about just open picnic areas? Are you a tennis enthusiast or a pickleball enthusiast? Do you want to see more courts up at this part of town? What about soccer fields or baseball diamonds? Or just keeping it open? And another one, are you a mountain bike trails? Are you a mountain biker? And then if we've missed any, put it in the chat and that'll help you share it with your fellow participants, and they can let us know if they like your ideas as well. So go ahead and select all that you like. I see there's lots of great comments coming into the chat. And just while you're finishing this poll, all of those comments that are in the chat are going to be exported and included with the results of the engagement process to be shared not only with staff, but with applicants and council. So thank you for giving some thought to your comments and what you're hearing. Okay, I'm seeing the selection slowing down. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and share with you what most people are saying. Okay, so we're seeing our kind of the top 5 that are showing up are playgrounds, dog parks, picnic areas, lawns, open areas, and mountain bike trails. So thanks for that. And it'll be interesting to see once we get the feedback forms if the results from tonight's session align with what the larger group of feedback prefers. Did I share those results, Stephen? Did you see them?
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
I saw them.
perfect.
Okay. Thanks, Joanne.
All right. And okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Stephen.
All right. Yeah, I'll continue on here with a few site considerations specific for this development. So at this stage, the city staff have required the applicant to submit a traffic impact assessment report, environmental assessment report, and geotechnical hazard report to better understand the impacts of this proposed development. These reports helped inform the proposed subdivision layout. For example, the reports identify areas of the properties that will remain natural and undeveloped due to environmental features or to geotechnical constraints. Should the land use change ultimately be supported, numerous technical items and detailed engineering design will be addressed through the subdivision stage. And I'll also add for participants that all these studies are available on the Shape Your City website for public review. If you haven't checked them out already, they are available for you to have a look through yourself. So community engagement is required when amendments to the official community plan are proposed. In this case, the applicant is proposing to update the mapping of the future land use designations in the North Wiltse block to facilitate rezoning the lands for residential development. The results of the engagement period will be shared with City Council, the applicant, and the community after the end of the engagement period. Staff are following the procedure for community engagement for OCP amendments. It involves many steps to raise awareness to give the public opportunities to learn about the proposal and provide their feedback. Shape Your City Penticton is the main hub of information for the project, and that's where you can fill out a feedback form to share your views. Notice signs have been posted on the property and letters were mailed to nearby residents within 100 meters. Stakeholder groups, including the school district and Penticton Indian Band, have been contacted for consultation. News releases and newspaper ads have also been distributed to help raise community awareness about this proposal. So thank you for listening to this presentation and for your engagement in the interactive polls. We hope it helped you understand the proposal in a bit more detail. And if you haven't done so already, please complete the feedback forms on Shape Your City before the engagement period closes on May 8th. And I'll turn it back over to Joanne.
Great. So tonight is first and foremost about answering your questions, and we do have a few in the Q&A. And I'm also noticing there's lots of great comments in the chat, and some of those comments look like they could be questions. We'll do our best to try to answer questions in the chat, but if you are submitting questions in the chat, please do put them in the Q&A function, because it makes it a lot easier for us to kind of manage the questions and answer them in an orderly manner. And so just before we get started, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce the remainder of our panel. I see who we've got here. So in addition to myself and Stephen and Michael, we also have Kristen Dixon, who is our General Manager of Infrastructure. And I believe we have Jonathan Chu, who is the city engineer. And we also have Audrey Tangay, who is our planning and licensing manager. And so for those of you who happened to be at the open house yesterday, this is the same team that was there to answer questions from residents. And we're here to answer your questions tonight. And with that, I'm going to get us started on the Q&A. And so thank you, Lori, for putting our first question in the Q&A box. You should be able to see what people are asking, and you can actually even upvote them. So our first question is from Lori, and Lori asks if the developer is planning on clearing all the forests and putting in asphalt and concrete except for the baby-sized parks. And I'm going to ask Stephen just to address that.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Lori. So the plan right now, there is a green spaces plan, and this might show it a little bit better. There's certain areas that are proposed to remain natural and undisturbed in the development site. The expectation is that no clearing occur in those areas. However, the remainder of the development site is likely to be cleared and regraded. So aside from those dedicated natural and undisturbed areas, a large portion of the development site would have to be affected vegetation-wise and grading-wise to facilitate development.
Great. And can you remind us how big this parcel is?
Sure. So the development site on the west side of the Fortis line is about 44 hectares or 109 acres.
Okay, and then the amount of land that's provided for conservation and parks makes up.
That's about 28 hectares of land. And I
Okay.
wish I could do conversions in my head easy, but that's probably around 50 or so acres.
Okay, great. So thanks for that, Lori. And we'll go to our next question. Comes from Ryan Drew. And folks, if you want to get your questions in there, we do want to hear from a wide range of folks. So please do put your questions in the chat. So our next question comes from Ryan. He's concerned that the parks that are being provided there are on a slope, and or will they be on level land?
Yeah, so some of the parks will require a little bit of grading to create some level spaces. Again, referring to the green spaces plan that was submitted, there are certain areas of the parks that are intended to remain natural. Those are the more sloped areas. The parks have been located in areas where there are some larger flat areas, and that kind of shows well on the concept drawings that are submitted. Yeah, so if we look at some of these, there are some flat spots on the park site that could be easily developed into parkland. And then you see with the trails, those switchbacks kind of indicate where the steeper parts are. You kind of make out some contour lines on the map as well. So a real mix. Again, we don't want to see completely flat land up there. We want to see some respect for the natural environment, and this is quite sloped terrain. But there are a few spots within the parks that are being proposed that are flat and suitable for more active uses. And that's what we were looking to see in the proposal as well.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Okay, so another question from Lori, and this is something that came up last night and I think is important to answer. And so her comment is related to watering park lawns and maintaining them. And I think in general, we should really talk about water up at this site. And so if are you the right person to answer that one, Stephen?
Yeah, I might see if one of my colleagues in the public works team is able to look at that one, as it's more of an ongoing parks maintenance question.
Yeah. So part of our, our intention with our management of our parks is to ensure that we do it in an appropriate way. We understand that, large green areas with huge amounts of water requirement are not necessarily the right way to go here in Penticton. And, as we move forward into the more detailed design of these parks, that's when we're going to start to look in the details of how we're going to maintain them, what are the appropriate planting types, the appropriate layouts for the area that we have. So, it will be a large part of the more detailed design of the parks. At this point, we're more going, what do we even want to see here in a park? And trying to get that feeling of a very high level, what kind of things do we want to consider? Once we have an answer to that, then we can start looking at the details. So yes, the water conservation will be addressed as part of our detailed design, as it is across all of our parks in the city. And we just haven't got to that level of details yet. At the moment, we're wondering, what do we want? What facilities do the community feel are appropriate up here? What are the facilities that they're going to use? We've thrown some ideas, the developers thrown some ideas out here, we've thrown some ideas out here, but really, before any of this is finalized, we just need to hear from the community and to hear their ideas and make a decision on how to move forward.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, and so Lori, we got one more from you because you got in early, and then we're going to start hearing from some other participants tonight. And Lori asked a question that we heard last night as well, and is one that's on everyone's minds, and it's about what are the provisions for huge risks from wildfires or landslides from atmospheric rivers, carbon capture. So there's kind of three questions there, but let's start with maybe wildfires. Are you the right person for that question, Stephen?
Yeah, I can tackle that piece of it. So this proposed development is located within the wildfire risk area. We know that a lot of the upper hillside areas are in this wildfire risk zone. So one of the requirements before any property is subdivided in that zone is that a wildfire risk assessment report is submitted to the city. oftentimes that professional requires that a covenant is registered on title of all those properties created, and that's to ensure that certain building materials are either used or not used to reduce wildfire risk. And then in the case of major developments, that maybe some treatment occurred to the lands, which helps reduce the risk of wildfire to the structures in the new subdivision. So that could look like wildfire breaks, but oftentimes it is in the form of a covenant that is tied with the lands and basically ensures that any future owner is aware that certain materials might not be permitted on the property and what the expectations are in terms of fire smart landscaping to make sure that the risk is reduced as much as possible for development on these hillsides.
Great, thanks for that, Stephen. Do you want to tackle things like sustainable development? I guess we've got carbon capture, landslides, more climate change type issues and how those are considered within this proposal?
Yeah, so the landslide one is interesting. There is a geotechnical hazard report that has been submitted, so it evaluated the higher risk areas of the site. It actually resulted in one of the areas that was planned for development being switched out of a development zone. So they have responded to the findings of that geotech report. And then in terms of carbon capture and just environmental features in general, there's always going to be some impacts from developing what is now natural land. The idea is that through more multifamily units on the site, it takes up less land area than if they were trying to achieve the same number of units all in a single family format. As well, we're looking at promoting active transportation as much as possible, just in general through the official community plan. So it sort of prioritizes pedestrians and cyclists over vehicle traffic and single vehicles in particular. So trying to figure out ways through new development, whether it's in the hillsides or whether it's in the built up core of the city, to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists as more sustainable modes of transportation long term than the single vehicle automobile.
Great, thanks for that, Stephen. Okay, so Stacy's asking a question more about traffic and access roads, which was something we heard last night at the open house as well. Stacy would like to know why there is no other access road being developed for such a large proposed development. Stacy suggests that Wiltse and Pineview are not adequate access routes. There would be increased safety concerns. Speeds are already too high. Construction traffic would be unsafe for the school zone on Wiltse Boulevard, not to mention both roads are inadequate should a wildfire or other emergency occur. This is a safety concern. Another access road must be considered. Is that a good question for Michael?
Yeah, so one of the things that we need to remember is that this subdivision and this planned development has been known of and thought of and included in our plans since prior to the existing Wiltse being developed. And so Wiltse Boulevard and Pineview and Partridge, the roads that connect to this new development, were all designed with the intent to handle the load from this development. So whilst there is capacity, those roads were designed to ensure that they had capacity for this future demand. I will definitely acknowledge that there are some significant issues with Wiltse Boulevard. There is a lot of speeding down Wiltse Boulevard. And so part of the benefit of us looking, the official community plan and the master plan, the traffic master plan, are looking to install a bike lane down Wiltse Boulevard and link that bike lane with the lake to lake bike route. And so the idea is if we can, install that bike lane down Wiltse Boulevard, we're going to squeeze Wiltse Boulevard a little bit more narrow to help reduce the speeding. And so whilst it's designed to handle that traffic, the problem is it's too wide. It's too comfortable to drive down there at high speeds. And so people are. And so what we need to do is narrow the road a little bit, ensuring that it's still safe, but to reduce those speeds to make people feel uncomfortable to travel above the speed limit. And so that's how the intention is to address the speeding along in front of Wiltse Boulevard and through the school zone. As part of that bike lane, there will be additional traffic calming put in place on Wiltse Boulevard where required, but mostly it's the bike lane itself will achieve that reduced width. During construction, the city have always held a position with the developer, and it'll be a requirement as we move forward that construction traffic doesn't move up and down in front of the school. We acknowledge that is a significant risk that we don't want to see. We'd love to have a really nice, easy industrial access to this development that, didn't go through residential areas for construction, but, that doesn't exist. However, the existing roads are safe for their intended use, and having the construction traffic move up Pine View and into the development in that way will ensure that the development can be built out safely without putting increased risk on the school. And I think that covers most of the challenges in that question. Is that right, Joanne?
Yeah, so just to confirm that in considering the capacity of those roads, emergency access is something that's also considered?
Yeah, that's correct. It's a requirement that all areas within the city have the 2 points of egress to allow that if something does happen, there is a second road for the community to evacuate from. And so, there is sufficient capacity on the existing roads to allow for, emergency egress and for fire department access during those emergencies.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, our next question comes from Ryan, and he wants to know if the parks are designed to minimize environmental impact, limit water requirements, maximizing use of existing trees. Now, we did answer the first part of his question, and I don't know if, Stephen, is there anything about trees in this proposal?
Yeah, so one piece that I mentioned earlier is that the lands proposed to be dedicated to the city, they're kind of split between two categories. So some parkland is intended to remain in its natural undisturbed state, while other parkland is intended to be developed for more active park uses like playgrounds, etc. So there's kind of a mixed answer there, yes and no, essentially, and really it's open at this point. So we can provide any comments that the community has into park design at this stage. We're not looking to approve park designs. It's just to put zoning in place. That's the application before us. But the park conceptual drawings were just to help kind of get the gears going for people to see what is possible on those active parklands. And then, do you like that? Do you not like that? What's missing? Kind of like a jumping off point. So it's certainly a comment we can put forward and something that we can watch for and push for through future park design should, again, the zoning be in place.
Great. So you're telling us that we should provide that feedback that you would, if you want to see existing trees preserved as much as possible, those are the types of comments that we can take forward and that can influence park design if this proposal moves forward. Okay, so Anne and Brad bring a different question. They want to know a little bit more about RM3 development on Hawthorne Drive because it's across the street from their single family house. And so when we talk about RM3 development, what is it? What are we considering here? Let's see if I can show it on the map. Yeah, this one here, I would imagine. Can you see my mouse? Okay.
Yeah, that's the one there. So the plan for multifamily is to have townhouses split into the RM2 and RM3 zone. The difference between those two zones is just how dense the development can be on the property. So typically for the smaller properties, the RM3 zone is used more so because they're able to get a higher number of units and more density than the RM2, which is a lower density zone. That specific spot on Hawthorne was discussed, and they're proposing to have a site-specific limitation on the height of buildings in that multifamily block. And I know one thing that came up at the open house yesterday was access. So will there be access for that townhouse block onto Hawthorne? And the answer is no. It's set so high above Hawthorne Drive that the only practical access to it is from that new road proposed in behind. And I'll remind people too that although the zoning lines go right up to the edge of the property, it is not by any means a flat site. So it's quite likely that the development will not be that close to the road. Although the property may extend that far, it may just not be practical to build that close to the street. So I hope that answers Anna and Brad's question about that specific area.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, a big question coming from Rick that got upvoted by 2 people. And that is, his question is, the existing infrastructure in Lower Wiltse sufficient to handle the extra load from the new development without upgrades paid for by existing property owners? And so I'm guessing that that is a Michael question.
Yeah, so
And sorry,
as
Michael, can you just clarify, do you know what infrastructure Rick's talking about? He's not just talking
yes,
about roads, is he?
no, I'm assuming that he's talking about roads, water, sewer, and roads, water, sewer, and storm infrastructure that that he's talking about. So as I mentioned earlier, this the Wiltse area that we know and that exists today was designed with this additional development in mind. And so the infrastructure primarily is sufficient for the capacity. The sewer and the sewer infrastructure is has capacity for this development. The stormwater infrastructure has capacity for this infrastructure, although as we get closer, both of those items will be checked in more detail. And if there are any upgrades required, then that would be done at the cost of the developer. The water system, we know there is not sufficient capacity to handle the water system, the water supply to this residential development. We have enough water within Penticton. The problem is it's all on the north side of Ellis Creek, and we need to have a new water line brought in from the north side of Ellis Creek, from the Carmi Road area, across through just to the east of the development area, but across Ellis Creek and then into here. So there is additional infrastructure required for the water development, and that again will also be paid for by the developer here. And so whilst there's not a huge amount of upgrades for water, sewer, or roads, there is a significant upgrade for the water system, and those upgrades are being paid for by the developer.
Great, thanks, Michael. Okay, our next question comes from Anne-Marie Beaton, and it's a process question, and those are some of my favorites. So Anne-Marie is asking, is this a done deal? Has the decision to develop the area already been passed? And I'm going to hand that one off to Stephen.
Yeah, so council has not made a decision on this zoning application to date. It was presented to them in April, and they gave staff direction to commence this public engagement period to gather people's feedback before they make any final decisions on the rezoning application. Now, part of this proposal is moving around some official community plan future land use designations. And that kind of goes back to earlier in my presentation. The city has plans for future development across every property in Penticton, what types of housing, what types of development we expect to see in different areas of the city. Now, this area, the Upper Wiltse lands, they have been designated for residential development since the early 1980s, although the details haven't really been hammered out. And in the meantime, the lower neighborhood has all been built up. So the zoning was never in place, and that's what's being applied for now. But no final decisions on the rezoning rather have been made to date.
Yeah, but that's a really important point, that these are private lands and they have been identified as future land use for residential development for a long time. So reasonably some level of development is going to happen here, and this is the proposal that's been put forward. So we're not asking, this process isn't about asking whether or not people want development there. It's about what development could look like, or about considering what this proposal looks like. Is that a fair assessment? Okay.
That's right, based on how it's been designated in the official community plan, which has been adopted by successive councils for about 40 years. It's not to say that this plan is the final plan. I think there's definitely some availability to incorporate some comments and feedback, and that's the whole purpose of going out to the community, is to hear what people have to say about it and come up with some better options potentially. But in general, the lands have been designated for development for a long time. However, the zoning is now proposed to be in place, and that's what this engagement session is really focused on.
That's great, Stephen, because that's really complicated municipal government processes, and I appreciate you taking the time to kind of really expand on that. Okay, so Ryan is asking about where would the proposed bike lanes be placed? And I know Jonathan is quite familiar with that. Jonathan, did you want to answer that one?
Sure. Was this question more directed toward the proposed subdivision, like lanes within that, or kind of lanes outside of that?
Can you
I can
answer
speak to
both?
I can speak to the latter.
Okay.
Maybe Michael might excuse me. Michael might be able to speak to the former.
Okay.
But kind of coming down Wiltse Boulevard is kind of our best route right now in terms of a bike lane. We'd be coming down Wiltse Boulevard all the way to Dartmouth. And then that's where we kind of have some options to connect down to our lake to lake, which is on South Main there. There's a potential to go north down the hill of Dartmouth Drive there, then kind of through Dawson Avenue, or potentially down south on Dartmouth Drive to connect to Pine View, and then eventually South Main Street.
Perfect. Thanks, Jonathan. Michael, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, so within the development, we'd be looking at having bike lanes along Collector Road 1, which is really the main thoroughfare through the development, north-south. We'd also look at some of the trails and trails and walkways acting as some of those links. As we get into more of a detailed design phase for the development itself, we'd look more at the internal network and the internal layout. One of the things that we've really focused on with our design of cycle infrastructure is making sure it goes somewhere, is making sure that it's not a single piece of floating bike lane. Currently on Wiltse Boulevard, there's a couple of sections of bike lane to go through some traffic calming and then nothing. So, one of the things we do have to look at is making sure we can put some links within this development to make sure that it's easy to move around within the development to get to the formal bike lanes along Collector Road 1 and then down into Wiltse Boulevard. And as we move through the design process, if council approve this development in its current form, and we're going to come back to the community and go through a process to engage them on Wiltse Boulevard and to say, okay, so we're putting a bike lane in. What do you guys want to see? How do you use the street? What is the appropriate outcome? And how do we put this bike lane down there? There's a lot of choices and a lot of different ways to do it. And that's something that we come back to the community next year to speak with the community about and run through those options with them.
Great, thanks, Michael. And I see we've got 29 questions and there's still other questions showing up in the chat. So I'm going to ask our panelists to really be focused in their responses, and we'll try and keep things moving along so we get to as many questions as possible. So our next question is really about the lands designated for park or conservation, and are the ones that are being left in the natural state really just unusable for construction?
Yeah, to answer that question, a total of 39.8 hectares of land is proposed to be dedicated to the city. And yeah, that 28 hectares is intended to remain in its natural undisturbed state. There's some benefits to that, whether or not it can be developed or not. There's definitely some benefits in terms of retaining some trees and natural landscape through the development, as well as creating some connections for species as well to get through the development with more natural lands instead of eliminating those entirely. So the 3.7 hectares, that's really just developed active parkland around playgrounds and benches and washroom buildings and turf areas, that sort of thing. But quite a bit more land is dedicated to the city, and a lot of that will remain in its natural state and could be used for trails as it's currently used today.
Great, thank you. Okay, I've got another question here on But whether or not, one of the things we heard last night was that people are really upset with the speeding along Wiltse. And so this Stacy is suggesting they'd like to see more bylaw enforcement along Wiltse and Pineview, and that there's currently no speed or bylaw enforcement. And my understanding from listening to Kristen last night, Kristen, I don't know if you want to jump in here, if you're available. If not, maybe Michael. Oh, here's Kristen.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I can jump in on that. Thanks, Joanne.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, speeding is certainly something that we heard yesterday, and we've heard lots of feedback from residents in general, not tied to this session, but just in general about speeding through the school zone and the issues that come with it. We do have, some bylaw presence that comes out periodically to the school zones to do more enforcement around, the no stopping or proximity to stop signs, things like that. But it is really difficult for the RCMP to prioritize kind of speed enforcement on a, frequent enough to make a difference. And, what we observe is the minute they leave, the issues pick up again. So we are actually doing some additional speed monitoring. We have some equipment out measuring what the speeds are, and that will help inform some of the later design decisions to help address those concerns. And we recognize that those issues are there, regardless of if this development proceeds or not.
Great. Thank you. Okay, and so we have a couple of questions related to how this development aligns with our climate action plan and how we'll be ensuring that the policies of the climate action plan are followed here.
Yeah, so I could tackle that one, and I'll kind of look at these next two questions sort of together as they both kind of pull in themes of climate change and climate adaptation. There's certain things that zoning can achieve and certain things that the city can't ask through zoning, but might be able to be achieved through other means. So one of the biggest ones that I see with reducing fossil fuels is with buildings. So my understanding is the city is now requiring new builds to build up to step code 3 under the BC building code, and over time that step code will get higher and higher. And essentially what that means is that they have to build to a higher energy efficiency standard so that new buildings have less I guess I don't know how to describe it. I'm not a building official, but they're a little bit more energy efficient than older homes for sure. So that's one way that we can achieve through development in general. I mean, aside from this development, greater sustainability through new buildings and new developments in general. And then looking at other things that we can achieve through zoning, that's where the parks piece comes in. That's where we can encourage trail connections through development sites, which encourages active transportation. Certain things that Michael was mentioning in terms of bike lanes and connecting to other infrastructure. Those are things that we can work with applicants on. So kind of between a mix of that and a mix of other tools, we can help work towards those goals.
Okay. And so anything on the specifics that Lori offered around geothermal and xeriscaping and water permeable roads, or does that come as part of the development permit, or?
Yeah, some of those requirements we can look at the subdivision stage, like what I mentioned with the wildfire covenant. Typically it has landscaping restrictions and different plants that may or may not be permitted on the property. Through the subdivision stage, we can look at a lot of things, but that's after the zoning is in place.
Great. Okay, so Sue's asking if this land has already been annexed to the city, and if so, when? Do we know when that one came into the city boundaries?
My understanding is that since the first OCP, which was 1982, this land has always been part of the city of Penticton. There was a block of land south of here where Evergreen Drive extension is currently built. That was annexed into the city, I believe, about 5 or 7 years ago or so. But this block has always been part of the city boundaries, at least as far back as I've looked.
Perfect, thank you. So Colleen is asking more about the traffic report, and she says she's reviewed it. She has concerns that's not addressing issues that already exist now with an increase in density. Currently, traffic coming off Wiltse Boulevard onto Dartmouth and Pineview onto Dartmouth are very hazardous. I would say I have cars zipping on front of me. So now Kristen did speak to some of the traffic issues. Michael, I don't know, is there anything more here?
Traffic impact assessment that was carried out by the developer specifically identified upgrades on Dartmouth and Wiltse intersection, as well as Dartmouth and Pineview intersection. And so those upgrades were identified within the traffic report and would be carried out as part of this development. Most likely it'll be tied in with the changes that will occur when a bike lane is installed. But yes, the traffic impact assessment does identify both those intersections and identify upgrades that can be carried out there.
Great. And so Colleen, if you have specific feedback that you want to share on what you don't like about the traffic impact assessment, you can certainly share that feedback. Okay, so Renee wants to know if there will be a set design plan for homes in the area, or will it be up to individual owners as to materials and concepts?
Yeah, there's no plan for a building scheme in this neighborhood at this time. In some developments, we do see that developers choose to put a building scheme on a neighborhood so that there's a similar look and feel throughout. That happened in Sendero, but there's no indication at this time that that would happen in this neighborhood. But it'd be up to the developer, not the city.
Okay. So I do think we need to answer the water question a little better in terms of the capacity of our water sources, treatment, etc., and what it means for the drought, potential droughts.
So within the context of Penticton, our existing, I guess, water production facilities have capacity for this additional demand. We have additional capacity in our intake through to our water treatment plant, through to our distribution network. And so that capacity is there. Is it a good thing to use all of that capacity? No. We don't need to waste water, but water conservation is a really important thing. And it's a trade-off. Should we save water by not having new homes? I don't think that's the appropriate trade-off. I think the appropriate trade-off is looking at water conserving gardens, looking at water reuse, looking at all of these other tools that conserve more water than we can by not allowing a few homes. But by going through those steps to properly conserve water can have a big impact and will have a big impact. However, our water infrastructure has enough capacity for the growth that's forecasted within Penticton. So we're not going to run into a capacity issue, but that said, we still need to focus on those water conservation issues because it's a really important thing to do.
Thanks for that, Michael. Okay, so our next question is, some green areas appear to be in the backyards of private residences instead of actual park spaces. Sorry, when people upvote, it changes the order of the questions on me. Oh. Okay, and so why can't the older proposal be followed, which has a lot more green areas? Why was rezoning necessary when the older proposal had both a balance of residential and green areas? And I think there's two questions there, because I believe I heard something similar last night around the green sloping in the backyards, and I'll see if I can find the right picture there. But who's the right person to answer this one, Stephen?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So on that green spaces plan, it does show lands that are dedicated to the city, but it also shows some revegetated slopes on private yards. Some of those are strata. Some of those, they have to provide plantings to help stabilize the bank after regrading. So that's what that plan is showing. Not the one on the screen, but there is a green spaces plan on Shape Your City that shows that quite well. And then in terms of the older proposal, I mean, that was certainly something that could have been applied for. In this case, the applicant has chosen to tweak the subdivision layout a little bit. And some of that was based on some of the reports that came through. Like I mentioned, the one change from the geotech report, which actually took a proposed development area out of development as a result of that detailed study. So there's a few tweaks, and the application has come forward this way. If there's certain aspects of the old proposal that people liked, if there's enough comments on that, then there might be, enough momentum to kind of at least explain those changes more, or perhaps revert some of those back to how it was before. And then again, that's the whole purpose of going to public feedback, is to hear what people think about the proposal when it comes time to actually consider rezoning.
Great, thanks for that. And so just on your screen is the map that shows the OCP changes. And absolutely, you will not be able to read that text from here, but on the Shape Your City site, you can look at this and zoom in to see what has changed from the earlier proposal. Okay. So Scott's asking if the fire risk has been addressed beyond the developed park bordering the natural landscape fire break. What about Cantech's property? What are they doing to address the fire risk?
Yeah, so the city hasn't required the wildfire risk report at this stage. It's a standard requirement of subdivision. So before any new lots are created, we would have to see and accept that fire risk report. The scope would only include the property subject to the development. So it could go further than the actual development site. It could include some upslope areas that are proposed to be developed as part of this proposal, but it wouldn't go too far beyond the property, because if it proposed requirements, I mean, if it's a different property owner, then there's really no tool or mechanism to make sure that they do that work. In terms of a specific property like Cantex, I can't really speak to exactly what they're doing or not doing in terms of wildfire risk, but that kind of explains a bit more the scope of what the wildfire risk assessment that the city requires would look at. And it would really just be focused on the development property and not so much beyond.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, so Kyle is asking why there's no green space behind Hawthorne Drive when there's green space behind everyone else. Oh, so I assume where my mouse is that we've got, is it these properties that it's all development along here? Is that what he's referring to?
Yeah, I believe so. And Joanne, if you flip back to the OCP map, that shows that as part of the 2014 Wiltse area structure plan, this whole area behind Hawthorne was intended for residential development. So this map, it doesn't show an orange or a red line around the outside, so it's not proposed to change as part of this proposal. Those lands right behind the Hawthorne Drive properties have always been designated for single detached development. So it's something that was part of the old proposal and got carried forward to this current zoning proposal. If there's, again, enough feedback on buffers, that's something the applicant may consider to add.
I would also highlight that the green space behind on the north side up at Evergreen is actually primarily a wildlife corridor. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why it is present on that northwestern side of the development there behind Evergreen. It is because it's a wildlife corridor.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, and so Scott's referring to the covenants. Will the covenants include what can be planted? For example, no cedar trees, which can go up quickly and require too much water.
Yeah, the wildfire covenant may go that far. We really leave it up to the wildfire professional. They're the ones with the training and expertise to make those recommendations or requirements for future development. Oftentimes, the fire break around the house is most common. So providing that highest rated zone within 5 feet of the building to remain free of any vegetation, that tends to be a typical requirement. It may go as far as identifying certain species, but again, we leave it up to the wildfire professional to make their determination.
Perfect. Kyle's curious who performed the geotech report.
Yeah, that report was prepared and submitted by Acora Engineering.
Okay, thank you. And so Lori, I think you've got some really great feedback on ensuring that we follow the community climate action plan. And I think your question is something that is feedback that we can take back, that you would like the city to require more walkability and carbon capture. Is that a fair assessment? I think that we've kind of indicated that it'll be more is it at the subdivision stage where you might see more ability to apply the policies?
Yeah, in some cases, yes. And then in other cases, there's other tools or other bylaws to achieve environmental goals that go beyond what zoning can achieve on its own.
Okay. And yet we will take that feedback forward. Thank you, Lori. So Ryan's concerned about whether the proposed bike lanes can remove all the on-street parking used by those on Wiltse.
So in short, we don't know yet. the city's going through the process to determine kind of how we want to implement those bike lanes down Wiltse Boulevard and that connection all the way down to the lake to lake. So that process hasn't been finalized yet. So as of today, we don't know.
And how will that process happen?
It'll be kind of in discussions with the developer, as the city would be looking to get some contribution in terms of money from the developer in order to implement those bike lanes.
And so if somebody wants to know, at what stage of the process would they get an answer to that question? Maybe that's a better way of framing it. So is that at the subdivision stage? Is that at like when would they have an opportunity to see that?
So Joanne, moving into next year, the city is going to go through a process to go through that that detailed design phase, and
Okay.
that will look like it has for the lake to lake. Hope probably not as substantial as the lake to lake process, but that's the idea is that going through that design and engagement with the community will occur towards the mid to late next year.
Okay, so just confirming, so that's a separate process from this
Yeah.
proposal. Okay, thank you for that.
That's
Okay. And I'm going to move on. I think we've really had some good discussion around the climate considerations. So our next comment or question is more of a comment, and our guest is concerned that the bike lane on Wiltse will narrow it and there'll be a bottleneck of cars from the 800 houses. And but the thinking there is that by introducing the bike lane actually will slow those cars down, which is what the problem is today. So Colleen is curious if there's a reason why the city does not employ a landscape architect for this project and others expected when carrying out the OCP.
So I think in answer to that question, we will. We're just not there yet. We're at a very high level concept phase right now, and then as we move through this process, more of those things will be confirmed, and yeah, the parks will ultimately be designed by qualified people.
Okay, and so Greg and Laura are curious about changes to intersections. Their feeling is that I guess they've reviewed the traffic analysis and that a few changes to stop signs is not really going to address congestion at the intersections. So is there any detail missing in what Greg and Laura are offering there?
So there have been, the issue with congestion in the intersections was identified as part of the traffic report. Solutions were identified within that traffic report. So what we do is those solutions will be further reviewed as part of it prior to being constructed to ensure that they're going to work. And as part of the bike lane, that's where we'll go through and do that detailed design of those intersections to make sure that we can put something in place that's going to work, and having those turning lanes that are proposed by the developer would be a really big start to moving forward with to resolving those congestion problems.
Okay, great. And Lori, I'm going to leave your question in case we have time at the end. And so our next question comes from Nicole. And so Nicole wonders why we can't put in another road access at the same time the water line is put in. She suggests it's easy peasy.
I wish it was easy peasy. Putting the water main in will be extremely difficult due to the terrain to get from Carmi down into the creek, across the creek and back up the creek. It's very steep, and unfortunately, city or the developer don't own any land along that alignment, and it's physically not possible to build a road from Carmi to this development, with the exception of a bridge that was proposed by a member last night, although that is a very, very expensive option. But the existing road network was designed for this to deal with the capacity of this development, and the existing road network has the capacity to deal with this development. So, you know, there are a few minor changes to improve things, but there is capacity within the existing network.
Okay. And so Renee would like to know how long can they expect construction to take?
Yeah, so the timeline on something like this can really vary. Typically, from rezoning to the first house being built, it's about 2 to 3 years, and some activity can happen on the site before that, like some clearing or regrading. For a project of this scale, we're probably looking for a complete build out of about like 15 to 20 years or so. Just for comparison, Sendero got their zoning approval around 2008, and they're still building the last few homes in there. And that was about 200 lots and about 15 years later. So it'll be many years in the making yet.
Great, thank you. Kathy's curious that if we are going to be diverting the water from the creeks to provide for the new homes, what's the impact for those riparian areas? Do we do studies to assess that?
Yes, we take a lot of care and a lot of effort in the amount of water that we extract from both the creek and the lake. And that's heavily regulated by the province. And so, yeah, those things are very carefully looked at.
Okay. Okay, and I'm going to move on to Ryan's question about whether the upgrades to the water supply blocked access to the existing trails east of the power lines.
No, they will not. All of the water infrastructure will be below ground.
Okay.
So it won't impact on access to those trails.
Okay. And so Lori's got a question about trails, and she's curious about how this will impact the existing trails that people enjoy now.
Yeah, so I can look at that one. So there's lots of trails currently throughout the site, kind of created both through wildlife and then through people too over the years. There are some trail connections being proposed. So some of them have to be developed to manage the steep grades, and then others kind of follow more natural trails that already exist. So along the Fortis line, there's already sort of an established trail along about half of it, and then the other half would have to be rerouted underneath that area to complete the connection through to the Skaha Bluffs Provincial Park. And then at the north end of the development, we kind of see that green band on the far left side. That I believe is a trail or adjacent to an existing trail already, which kind of leads up from the Wiltse Boulevard parking lot, sort of at the top of the road there. So sort of a mix. There's a couple existing trails that will remain, and then many that will be either redirected or lost to development.
Great. Okay, and so Nicole's wondering why we're talking about developed parks instead of just leaving it natural. And so what we do know is that in our Parks and Rec master plan, there's a desire to add more parks. And certainly if Nicole prefers to keep it all natural, that's feedback we can you can bring to the process. Did you have anything else you would want to answer on that one, Stephen?
One of the things I heard from a few people last night was that there's not a lot of parkland in the neighborhood right now. Like there's Wiltse School and that's sort of it. So I think that there is an appetite for some developed parkland, and that's about that 3.75 hectares of land or so. And then, as I mentioned earlier, about 28 hectares is proposed to be dedicated to the city as parkland, but left in its natural undisturbed state. So there's sort of a mix of both with this proposal right now. Is that mix right or wrong? I think that's where the feedback comes in, whether we should have more of one or less of the other. But that's the proposal as is. We have a mix of both the active developed parkland as well as a lot of natural land as well.
Great, thank you. Lori's next question is about electric minibus public system, but maybe we just want to talk about transit in general, because that was something that was brought up last night too.
So the current plan is to require Collector Road 1 and the upgrades that we'll do to Wiltse Boulevard with the bike lane to be designed to allow for transit. The city and BC Transit need to have a look at redoing our transit network, and that will be driven by demand. So as this is a 20-year project, everything will be built to allow for transit when it's required. But at the same time, it's not something that's going to go in on day one. There won't be the demand in that area to drive transit in day one. And when that demand exists, then we'll move the transit. It'll be built to allow for transit.
Yeah, and if you want to see electric minibuses, and definitely just give us that feedback. That's something we can bring to feedback we can bring back, and as that technology and service becomes available. Okay, the next question, the tough question: how does this address housing affordability within the city? The price of these homes will most likely target the $1 million plus range and are not within a reasonable range for a first-time home buyer.
Yeah, I'll tackle that one best I can. So affordable housing is definitely a challenge. And at this point, market rate housing, it's hard to consider it affordable across any definition of the term. Typically, affordable housing is more rental housing, which is tied to the tenant's income. Usually it's through some sort of government agreement or some nonprofit arrangement. We have a few of those in Penticton. None are being proposed in this neighborhood. The plan is for a lot of multifamily, and some of that is because of the high construction costs of developing on this hillside. It's more expensive to build on the side of a hill than on flat land. So to offset some of those costs and bring down the future costs of any homes in the area, the plan is for a lot more multifamily to kind of share the load of the expense that it would cost to build those homes, bringing down the prices slightly. But no, I wouldn't call it affordable by any means.
As someone who's looking to buy a home, hey, Stephen?
No personal bias there at all.
Okay, so Nicole's curious about the wildlife corridors and how have they been considered through this proposal?
Yeah, so good point. There's one dedicated wildlife corridor on the site. It connects down through to Hawthorne. You kind of see it on the red line near the right side of the map here. So that's intended to connect into existing wildlife corridors behind the Hawthorne Drive homes, and then it kind of connects through behind some Partridge Drive homes and around Barton Court. So that connects those areas through the new development to the natural area across the forest line. There's a couple other trail connections through the site which could be used as wildlife corridors, although they are built for people as well with trail systems. So that's the whole length of the Fortis Trail, as well as this green corridor connector here through the middle of the site. So a couple that might be used for that purpose, but you're right, only one that's dedicated and would be designed out for just wildlife and not people.
Great, okay. So Lori is bringing up species at risk. Can you talk about how this proposal or how species at risk are considered in this proposal?
Yeah, so we got the environmental assessment report for this whole property, and essentially it ends up categorizing the lands into 4 different environmental assessment categories. So there's ESA1, which is the highest sensitivity. It's the most suitable for habitat, or it is locations of habitat for certain species that needs to be protected. Then there's ESA4, which is already disturbed land. So it's either developed already, or there's a portion that of this site which was previously used as a gravel pit, I think. So that was ESA4. So there's a mix of all 4 categories on the site. What I can say is that the ESA1 areas are all in lands dedicated to the city. So they're all in these natural undisturbed areas, the most sensitive lands for habitat and species at risk. There is quite a large area of ESA2 and ESA3. So those are the moderate and low sensitivity areas which would be developed. But the ESA1, the highest sensitivity, are all located on natural lands that will be dedicated to the city and remain undeveloped that way.
Great, thanks for that. And I'm going to throw a curveball in because we have a related question in the chat about whether or not there will be land clearing timing windows to avoid nesting migratory birds. How is stuff like that considered in a development like this?
Yeah, I think Audrey or Michael have some experience with that with some other subdivisions in the city.
So prior to going through the subdivision, they're required to do an environmental study which identifies any potential environmental impacts of the work they're doing, and that always identifies the tree window, the nesting bird window. And there are very strict rules around land clearing and nesting trees and nesting birds, and they'll have to ensure that they work around those policies. So that will be dealt with in detail at subdivision and prior to construction.
Great, thanks, Michael. We have a big, bold idea coming from an anonymous participant who would like to perhaps add water parks or open community pools in the area, if that would help reduce the fire risk. You can put it in the parks feedback.
We'll put it on the
I love
list.
the idea of that.
Okay. All right, so so our next question comes from also from an anonymous attendee here, and they're asking if the current fire egress road from the end of Hawthorne Drive to Redwood Drive, is it going to be used as a construction route, as it is certainly not built for that type of or amount of use?
That's correct. It is not built or intended for that use. No, the construction, it will not be used for construction routes. It'll stay very much as it is.
Okay.
Oh, there is some construction that will happen near the reservoir directly behind that road. So there will be a little bit of construction access. They need to build a building and do some plumbing and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But it's not like access for the development.
Okay, perfect. Our next question comes from Carlos, and this is something that we did address earlier, and he's curious about whether we're going to eliminate on-street parking with the bike lane. And as we mentioned, that's going to be a separate process that will get underway. Was it next year? And so please do watch for that process. And if you want to have your comments and concerns addressed. Okay, so Nicole's curious about having two full-time, police officers to patrol both Pineview and Wiltse for speeders. I think we did talk about speeding. Certainly bring forward your concerns about speeding. It's definitely been noted in our transportation master plan. It's a problem area, and definitely some opportunities to address that through this. Anne and Brad are curious, who is the developer? I'm not sure what we can answer on that. What can we say, Stephen?
Yeah, so Wakora Engineering are the applicant for this proposal. Some people might have noticed or seen in the news that the property is currently listed for sale. So likely whoever purchases the property would be the development company that goes ahead with the project.
Okay. Our next question comes from Patty. This is a good one. What consideration has been given to providing room in schools for the number of children in this development? Can Wiltse, this person is suggesting that Wiltse cannot handle the increase in student numbers.
Yeah, that's a good question, and definitely something I heard from a lot of people at the engagement session yesterday. We do engage with the school district when these big proposals come through, and we look for their feedback and comments. We haven't received any yet, but I'll definitely be following up with them before the engagement period ends. I did have a chance yesterday to speak with the principal of Wiltse, and he kind of explained the current situation as well. Recognizing that this proposal is many years away from full build out, there's definitely time for the school district to adjust and accommodate for any new students that go in the area as a result of the development. But we'll be certainly looking for exact word from the district as part of this engagement period too. So they're one of our key stakeholders, and their comments are definitely valuable for council to consider on this rezoning.
And I'd also mention that last year the school district did an analysis of school capacities as part of their facility study across all of the schools, and looked out at a forward planning to like 2032. And so whilst Wiltse School is identified as a school that will be nearing capacity in 2032, there are many schools across Penticton that won't be nearing their capacity. And so what we'd probably see is that the school boundaries would be shuffled slightly to allow for those schools that are under capacity to get more students. So at the moment across Penticton, the schools district are going, more children are a good thing. The more children we have in our schools, the less likely we are to have to close our schools. So that's the that's sort of the wider picture in which we're looking.
Yeah, I was looking at a study today that showed that, yeah, enrollments declined by, I think it was about 1,700 students, and that Wiltse itself was at about 83, 85% capacity. And so I'll see if I can find that study and put it on Shape Your City, because this has been a question that we've heard.
I think we were looking at the same study.
Perfect. Okay. I'm not quite understanding Nicole's question. I'm not sure if my colleagues here can understand. She's curious if we don't need to plant gardens if we preserve the natural landscape. Would you say we don't need to plant gardens if we preserve the natural landscape?
I think what she's getting at is that as part of development, we always destroy everything that is there and then come back and rebuild it. And so, like looking at residential lots, there is no natural vegetation left on those residential lots. And due to the nature of the hillside development and the need to regrade to create lots that you can build on, the grade has to change, which means that on these hillside areas, most of the vegetation where in and around houses and roads needs to be removed. Unfortunately, it's the cost of hillside development. But we can require those areas to be replanted if they're not, we can do as much replanting as we can.
Okay, and so Lori, more feedback on requiring sustainable development, banning lawns, retaining water. So thank you for that. Our next question comes from Rick Furlong. Is there a time limit to build out the vacant lots? He says he's tired of seeing all of the undeveloped lots blowing dust everywhere in other developments.
Yeah, the short answer to that is no. The city doesn't really have an ability to force someone to build on property within a certain timeline. Sometimes we issue approvals for permits, and then if that permit doesn't get built out, that permit expires, but it doesn't mean that they have to build or else. It just means that they'll have to reapply for permit if that expires. So we don't have an ability to force someone to build within a certain time frame.
One of the things that we do have the ability to do is to require the developer to undergo dust control on their site, which is very expensive, either planting wild natural grasses so that it holds the soil together, or using a salt-based chemical that acts as a light glue to hold the surface together to stop dust. Both those things are very expensive requirements on the developer. So if the community comes back and provides lots of feedback with concerns around dust control of those developments, then that's definitely something we can require the developer to do. But if that's a concern, then please make sure it's documented and it's written, and that will give us the ability to hold the developer to that.
Okay. Let's see. I've got a few questions at the top here. Are you looking at the questions from Terry McKnight there, Stephen?
Now I am, yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I missed those earlier. But Terry's curious. She says there are smaller $400,000 to $500,000 homes that should be emulated in new areas. McMansions are not the only single family homes that should be planned. And so really that's a comment and feedback that we can take forward to council. Is there something that you'd want to say about the small lot residential in these areas?
Yeah, so I'll highlight that. So there's a couple different single family zones proposed. So one is the R1 large lot residential, the other is the R2 or small lot. The difference isn't what's allowed in those zones, it's just how close you can build the property lines and then the smaller size of lots allowed in the R2 zone. So on the same amount of land, you could have more R2 lots, which still allow single family, than fewer R1 lots, which require bigger setbacks and a bigger lot area. One of the other things included in this development is duplexes. There's a couple duplex zone lots, as well as a bareland strata, which would consist of single detached homes. And there's quite a few in that neighborhood already. And with single detached bareland stratas, you really have minimal building setbacks. Like those houses can be quite close together and really take up a small footprint.
Yeah, so probably still won't get down in that price range, but those ones would likely be more affordable than some of the larger lot residential.
Mhm.
Okay, so Terry has another comment. This was also something that came up last night. If you want a livable community, that you need to have some commercial development in there for shopping, so that all the residents up there don't always have to go down the hill in order to get groceries or convenience items. Was that something that was considered in this proposal?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something that came up through the Wiltse area structure plan in 2014. They had a plan for a little commercial node in the center of the development. That's now been taken away. I think one of the challenges is that we can zone for commercial, but we can't make sure that a viable commercial business operates there. I think elsewhere in this neighborhood, I think at the corner of Wiltse and Dartmouth, there's a small commercial property and it has a daycare in there now, but I believe it used to be a corner store at one point and it just found it difficult to operate. So even though we zone the land for that use, it may not necessarily mean that it's viable for that use. So it's a comment that's fair. It would definitely improve, the livability of the area up there by having some more commercial uses. But it's not to say that through zoning it's guaranteed that a certain shop would go in there and be successful and remain in business. That's the challenge.
Okay, so but if people would like to see commercial back in this proposal, they could definitely provide that feedback.
Yeah, that feedback's important to capture for sure.
Okay. Let's see, we answered this one too. And so while I'm just catching up here, so Lori would like a little more detail on the wildlife corridor and just what is the intent? How does it work?
Yeah, so the wildlife corridor, there is a landscape concept drawing which shows what a concept could look like for the corridor. Essentially, it's a green space that's landscaped and it's separated from the houses on either side. So you can see it kind of cuts through some developed areas. So the idea is that it's planted with specific species and either restored if it was disturbed, or kept undisturbed as much as possible. And it's to provide a connection to the existing wildlife corridors in the development further down the hill, like behind the Hawthorne houses, the Partridge houses, and Barton Drive. As those subdivisions developed, the wildlife corridors were identified there. The one on this proposal would connect it to other habitat areas upslope.
Okay. And so our next question is, so when we bought our house on Evergreen Drive, we were told there would be a park behind the house as shown in the original proposal. This has now been changed to large residential. Can the original park in the proposal be kept so the green area is not taken away? The first 7 houses on Evergreen will have butt jointed houses with the change proposal.
I think that's fair feedback. It's definitely something that we'll relay back to the applicant because it is something that they propose to change with this new concept. I know that there's a small buffer there now of green space between the proposed houses and the existing houses on Hawthorne, but it's certainly a change from the larger park space proposed. So if we hear a lot of people with that feedback, it's definitely something we can go to the applicant with and say, hey, we've heard this from quite a few people. Definitely consider changing the plans. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay. Okay, so Kyle's curious if there's going to be blasting behind Hawthorne Drive.
At this stage, we're not sure. We haven't done any investigations into the geotech conditions. That will be addressed as part of the detailed subdivision, and any blasting requires it to go through a permitting process with the city.
Okay. Let's see, how are we doing here? Well, folks, we've answered 56 questions so far. We still have another 19 to go, and in case you have a few more to enter in there as well. So Nicole's curious. Her feedback is that the wildlife corridors seem narrow and circuitous, and just wondering she's suggesting that there's a green area along the northern edge with narrow connections to the west, but then the green space ends completely. Should they not be connected to the parking lot at the southeast end of Evergreen? That's probably fair feedback to take forward.
Yeah, fair feedback for sure. Connections are key too, both for trails and for wildlife and natural areas. It doesn't show on this plan too well, but just off the map is the parking lot for Evergreen. So that Fortis Trail does provide that connection all the way through the site. It's just kind of in that bottom right corner there.
Right over here.
But we'll take that feedback and note it in terms of the width and then the routes of the wildlife corridors and trail connections.
Okay, thank you. So a new question or a question from a new guest, Arnold is concerned about street parking around the RM2 and RM3 residential development. There has to be enough on-site parking. Streets can be used to drive on or use as a parking lot, but not both.
Yeah, so this is something we could definitely note when we get to the detailed design stage for those townhouse blocks. They'll have to apply for a development permit. So at that stage, the city can require certain things to be on site and certain design changes potentially. As long as they meet our zoning bylaw, that's really the key test. So the zoning bylaw does have parking requirements. The minimum standard is 1 parking space per unit and then 1 parking space for every 4 units for visitors. Whether in this area, the idea is to provide more, just given its location. That's something that the developer will come up with at the time when they submit plans. But it's something that we can note for now and then keep in the back of our heads should the multifamily zoning get approved and then the applications come forward to the city.
Great, thanks, Stephen. So Nicole is asking if the clearing can happen in small stages so that the dust isn't blowing for many years as the build out happens.
That's, yeah, as part of the development process, the city gets to have a say in how that clearing takes place. They need to get permits and get approvals to do that. And our vision is to not allow the entire site to be clear cut and regraded, but only the bit that's being worked on. And so we are cognizant of the impact of dust and of clearing ahead of what needs to happen. And so, yeah, we will try and keep that to a minimum.
Okay. So an anonymous attendee wants to know if we can build additional water reservoirs for rainwater harvesting and add it to the proposal. I think it's referring, yeah. Go ahead, sorry, Michael.
Something, rainwater harvesting is a really good opportunity to look at collecting and reusing water. At the moment, there's nothing stopping us doing it, but we don't have any sort of policies or any guidelines that would either encourage homeowners to do it or that we could require the developer to do that.
Okay. And so certainly that's something you can put forward as a request. So Patty is curious about watching the prolonged construction at the end of Evergreen. She's worried that this construction will create continuous dirt and dust and noise for years to come. How will the city help current homeowners in the area reduce this concern?
One of the roles that we fulfill during construction is to monitor the construction activity to try and manage that impact on the surrounding communities. It is impactful. There's no, let's be clear. This is a construction activity. Trucks and construction crews will be coming and going regularly through these areas. We require them to ensure they tarp their loads, they wash the roads to keep them clean. They put all these methods in place to try and minimize that impact. And it's something that we work on throughout the construction, and it's something that we'll definitely be focused on here.
Okay, thank you. So Erica's just offering, she's seen an advert for properties. It has single family homes starting at 900,000. Are there sale adverts out there already for this, or?
There is a listing out there for the land. They might have included some preliminary price points in their advertisement to developers to purchase the property, and I think that's what she's referring to.
Okay, great. Okay. So Kati is just offering, we're curious about what the imperative is to rezone. If it's to provide more housing for those in need, it seems that those projects would be better located in the flats, and so more down into the main housing area, but that can, or the main town area. So that's something that you can speak to about our strategy for managing growth.
Yeah, and I mean, what I'll say too is that this application has come forward from the landowner, so we don't control the timing or the location or the way that the application comes forward. We can work with them on certain aspects of it, but this is what's been proposed by the landowner of this property. In terms of the housing strategy in general, the focus of the OCP is definitely on infill and keeping Penticton's footprint compact. But at the same time, we're aware that there is a major demand for single detached homes. Right now, about 3/4 of new residential building permits are multifamily types, and there is a need still for single family homes. So certain areas have been designated in the OCP for that purpose, and this Upper Wiltse land being one of them. So while we need housing in the flats and the flatter areas of town, absolutely, there's a lot of construction activity happening in those areas as well, and a lot of proposals in the pipeline for those places. There is still demand for these hillside type developments as well. So it's trying to accommodate a little bit of everything and finding the right balance.
Thank you, Stephen. So Lori's asking questions about the trees, and I want her comments read a bit more like, or her question reads more a bit more like comments, but I'm just curious. I'm understanding that we are looking at doing an urban forestry plan this year. I'm not sure if anyone in the room is able to speak to that, to talk about what how that will help us put policies in place around protecting our trees. Do we have anyone in the room that's able to speak to? Oh, thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Joanne. Yeah, you are correct. We have included in our work plans to do that study, which would include, assessing the protection measures we have for our urban forestry and any additional measures that we might need to take, and considering what our canopy coverage is, what target should we be setting. All of those things will be included in that plan that again is in our work plan for this year.
Great, thank you. I know that's something that I'm looking forward to working on, because it's a concern that's been brought up pretty steady over the past several years.
And I would say that in relation to this development specifically, we will require the development as they go through their subdivision stage to identify the number of trees that they're going to cut down and provide us with a tree replacement program for those trees. And they will be, other examples have happened in other subdivisions where they've done a 1-to-1 replacement for those trees. Some have said a 1 to 1.5 replacement program for those trees. And the idea is that we identify the trees that are being removed as part of development, and then they have to replace those trees, and we have to show them where they are replaced, and they have to show us where they're putting them back, and they have to follow through with that.
Great, thanks, Michael. I've got another one for you. So Rick is curious about the construction route for the heavy traffic of large trucks. Is this something in particular that would be addressed where the heavier trucks go?
Yeah, that's right. So what we'd be looking at doing is routing the heavier construction vehicles and the bulk of the construction traffic up through Pineview. Primarily because Wiltse Boulevard has the school on it, and that's not an ideal route for construction route. So while Pineview is steep, it is narrow, it is a safe road for construction access. The construction access, it is the construction access for everything that's been built above it. All of those existing suburbs were built accessing through Pineview. The bluffs have just been built accessing through Pineview. So whilst it is a steep road, it complies with our width standards, and it is a safe road for access.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, and so Lori's made a further comment that this development is just not meeting her expectations of a truly climate-friendly, consciously developed nature-based development. So definitely great feedback, and important for us to continue to keep top of mind with these proposals. Let's see, where are we at now? We've answered 69 questions. We have 12 to go. Let's see, Ajit says, will the natural park next to Wiltse Elementary stay in place? There have been suggestions that it'll be replaced with a parking lot to make up for the lost parking on the roads. This will further reduce green space in the neighborhood. Do we have an answer for that?
So the multiple things are happening at the same time. Separate to this development, if this development was not going ahead, there is currently a issue with parking and pick up and drop off from Wiltse School. And so the Wiltse School is looking at opportunities that they have to address that problem. And the city is supporting them in sort of brainstorming options. And you are correct. One of the options that has been brainstormed was expanding the existing car park at Wiltse School to allow for a pickup and drop off zone. But that is something that is happening sort of irrespective and separate to this development.
Okay, thanks for that. So Nicole is suggesting that perhaps clear cutting could happen in smaller stages so that dust suppression is not needed. So that's definitely some, let's put that comments in there and it'll be part of our record on this. Let's see. Was something related to soil stability dust control used at the end of Hawthorne Drive, albeit unsuccessfully?
Yes, it was. And we're still working with the developer to complete the requirements. So even though they tried and it didn't work, we haven't let them off the hook just because they had a good crack. And so they're currently putting additional measures in place to meet that requirement of dust suppression and slope stability. So it's one of the things the city does is we hold them to account. If they say they're going to provide dust suppression, we can hold them to that. If they say they're going to provide slope stability, we hold them to that. We don't let them just do it once and walk away. They have to actually achieve the outcome that they've said.
Great, thank you for that. And so Miriam is curious about a few more details on the sports area, tennis courts, basketball court, ball diamond in the development.
I think that's one of the key questions that we're asking through engagement is what features people are interested in seeing in the parks. Definitely nothing is set in stone at this time. They have provided some concept drawings just as rough ideas and kind of to get the ball rolling on people thinking about what they like to see. But really we're looking for feedback at this time as to what features people might want to see in those park areas. So it's really open right now.
Great. So Erica's curious about the effect of blasting in close proximities to nearby houses, i.e. the proposed houses immediately behind on top of the Hawthorne Drive houses.
And there are really strict rules in Canada, and I would imagine most places, around the maximum limits around blasting. And those limits are designed to ensure that houses are not damaged. So houses move throughout the year as the soil underneath them freezes, gets wet, shrinks, dries out. So houses do go through a lot of movement throughout the year, and they are, and so the vibrations that occur as part of construction, construction of a house next door, or as part of blasting in a nearby area, are kept under a limit to ensure that they don't damage the housing.
Okay, and we have another blasting question. And I think you kind of addressed this earlier, that we don't actually know where blasting is going to be required yet. And so this person wants to know, will there be blasting above North Evergreen by Redwood Road? So
yeah, unfortunately, until we start the detailed design and excavations and studies, we don't know exactly where it will be required.
Okay. And so our next question is, how can the houses on Evergreen ensure that the feedback to keep the green area as stated in the original proposal be provided to the city to prevent rezoning of this park is detached residential? I'm a new resident and will not get the house possession until the end of next month, and the feedback form would have been sent to the seller. Well, the feedback form is available online, and so definitely submit your feedback there. And we'll definitely be looking for themes and comments, and we'll provide the whole package of them to staff as well as the developer as well as council. If anything you want to add to that, Stephen, about this particular request?
Only that change has been noted by quite a few people. So I think it's something that should be on the developer's radar from the feedback period. And then they should consider that if looking at any changes to their plan going forward.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have about 6 questions left and we're at the 10-minute mark. Okay. So Patty is still not too happy with dust, especially with what has been seen with the Skaha development. So yeah, I'm not sure we can speak anymore to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
On,
Yeah.
construction is impactful on the surrounding residents, and the city, we work with the contractors and the developers to try and minimize that as much as we can.
Okay. And I'm definitely starting to see kind of a recycling of some of the questions here, which is great because to me, it tells me that we've got the vast majority of questions kind of covered. So we've got a question about having a wildlife corridor from the park at the south end to the east edge of the Wiltse block, and that would be great to give access to trails beyond and connect the 2 ponds. So definitely great feedback that will document as part of this process, but it's also something that you can provide in the feedback form that's available on Shape Your City. Anything else you want to add there, Stephen?
Nothing too much on that one other than the feedback is certainly valuable. Looking at the zoning plan here, you'll see a chunk at the top end, which is the east side, is planned to remain zoned A, which is the current zoning. So that land is intended to remain privately owned. So that feedback can be considered by the applicant, but at this time going over to the east edge is still intended to remain private property based on the plan submitted right now.
Okay. Let's see. Some comment from Nicole of wanting to keep the original ponderosa pine trees that don't require water. I think we did speak to trees and the natural areas and providing feedback to try to maintain as many of the natural trees as possible. And let's see, traffic is going to be a major issue. There's no additional route out of the area. Evergreen and Balsam Avenue besides the school will become a freeway. And I think that we've kind of spoken to the traffic impact assessment. And
I would say that there's not likely to drive a lot of traffic towards Balsam Avenue just by the nature of it not being along one of the main access routes. The primary access routes to and from this development will be Wiltse Boulevard down to Dartmouth and Partridge through Evergreen down to Pineview. So so Balsam Avenue really isn't on that route. But yes, there will be increased traffic along those other routes.
okay. And then, of course, some feedback from Lori around wanting to see green building. And that's definitely something we'll take back in the feedback as well. And with that, that is all of the questions submitted through the Q&A function. Oh, okay, and so feedback for council, absolutely everything that you write will be provided to council, and they are going to have to balance a number of considerations when they're making a decision. Just to reiterate the process, so council hasn't even given this proposal first reading. We're conducting this engagement process before that. So we'll take all the feedback back to staff and provide it to the developer, and the applicant will have the opportunity to make any adjustments that they might like based on what they've heard, and then should they wish to proceed, we'll take their proposal to council for first reading along with all of this feedback that's been shared, and then council will decide whether or not they want to give the bylaw first reading. If they choose to give the bylaw first reading, the next step in the process will be to hold a public hearing. And so we'll be sending out, if you are in the area that receives direct notifications, you will get another letter from us letting you know about the public hearing. You will also see a new sign show up on the site that is indicating the new public process that will be undertaken. So, and if you're registered on Shape Your City, you will get a notice from me directly. I send those emails. So please do register. I try not to put a lot of spam in your inbox. Just one email from me every couple of weeks to let you know just what's happening on some of the major decisions in the community. And I would really like to thank all of you for giving us 2 hours of your night to talk about this important proposal that's being considered for the community. And your very thoughtful and informed comments are really excellent. And I also just want to thank staff. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Jonathan, for giving your time as well for tonight's event. And with that, I will give the rest of you your evenings back. And one more thing, we are having an open house again on Saturday at the Penticton Seniors Drop-In Center. If you want to come and see some of the plans up closely, if you want to talk to staff in person, or if you want a world famous cinnamon bun from Ambrose, we'll have some cinnamon buns there as well. And trust me, they're a big draw. So if you have time to drop by on Saturday, 10 till noon at the Penticton Seniors Drop-In Center. And with that, I'll say good night.